Ben, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks for having me, Sam. Excited to be here.
Yeah, excited to learn some of the stuff. So, for anyone listening, can you just give us a brief overview of your current role and what it entails for you?
Yeah, of course. So I work for a global gifting platform, which a lot of people, I guess, don't know what a gifting platform does. It's kind of a marketing tactic, I guess, that as you would send like an email, you make a cold call, you might send someone a gift, and we kind of help with facilitating that across the world. I currently lead the sales team at Reach Desk, so work closely with a group of account executives, which is a fancy name for a salesperson in the US and in the UK, and I also work with a solutions engineer as well, who does the technical work behind the
Mm,
platform. So, yeah, I guess a fancy way of saying I lead the sales team here.
awesome. Yeah, I'm excited to learn a bit more about that in a moment, but I want to take it back to a bit before then. So, before you sort of got into that role and you were traveling Australia, so you were there for 4 years, right? Um, what took you to Australia? What drove you to go and have that experience in the first place?
Yeah, so I grew up in Suffolk, which I don't know. It's not the most exciting of places. Don't get me wrong. I loved growing up there. Very green, very beautiful. And I went off to the University of Essex, which again is based in Colchester. So sort of an hour away from home. I still played for my local football team. Still saw my parents quite a lot. Nothing wrong with that, of course. No offense to them. But I never had that experience of kind of traveling, um, living in a big city. I probably had been to London before I went off to Melbourne. Was the first place I went to, uh, probably three or four times. So after finishing uni, me and a friend thought, um, where's the closest place to the UK in terms of culture where we can go and work and travel, and it's not too much of a monumental shift,
Mm.
but the weather's lovely. So Australia seemed like the perfect place to go. And when I was at uni, I studied um, teaching English as a foreign language. So I studied linguistics, and a
Mhm.
lot of what I did was about um, yeah, teaching other languages. So my plan was actually to go to Australia, and from there potentially go to somewhere like South Korea, Japan. I wasn't really sure to teach English, but loved Australia so much that I ended up staying out there for around 4 years.
What was it about Australia once you were there that sort of kept you there? Was there anything in particular that you really enjoyed besides the weather?
Well, I was going to say it's quite weird for a ginger to be saying that they enjoyed the weather so much. It's quite a bizarre place, right? Because you've got have you been to Australia?
I've never been, no. Maybe this year my sister's over there, so
It's an incredible place, but it's what is it the size of Europe, potentially even bigger, and you've got five major cities. I think you've got Perth on the west coast, you've got Adelaide, Melbourne down south, then you've got Brisbane and Sydney on the east coast, and then some places like Cairns and Darwin. But for such an incredibly large country, you've got these cities, and um, what I found when I was out there is they've just pumped so much, I guess, money into the infrastructure around the cities that when I was in Sydney in particular, you go there and it's this kind of idyllic place that you see on Bondi. I don't know if you've seen Bondi Rescue, but you've got Bondi Beach and all those pictures that I saw kind of growing up of the Harbour Bridge and the Opera House. You go there and you see it in real life, and you're like, okay, this is incredible. And because of the I guess the vitamin D you're getting all throughout the year, you're constantly, I think, happy and feeling blessed about where you are. So just go in there. The people are very relaxed as well, very similar to I guess the UK, if well, where I was growing up. But then you go to the city, you go to London, and everyone's a little bit like rushing to get wherever they want to
very
be.
unrelaxed, yeah.
Yeah, very stressed, work heavy. And when I first started working out there, everyone was like, you run past sort of 4 o'clock, you get to like 1 past 4, and the entire building is just empty. Everyone's kind of packing up, going to the beach, traveling to see friends, family, going to have a beer in the local in the local pub. So yeah, I couldn't personally, I couldn't live out there long term just because it was so far away from my family. But it seemed like the perfect place to settle for a few years.
Were you, yeah, so obviously you said you wouldn't stay there long term, but what did you learn from that experience? And was that where you first took your venture into sort of that sales role?
Yeah, absolutely. So I feel like Australia is the place where I really sort of grew up. Going back, like I mentioned, I was always close to my family and friends at home, and never really had the need to sort of um, yeah. There was always someone a kind of a call away, but when you go that far, and you're there sort of not. I was with a really close friend, but you're kind of there by yourself. I feel like that sort of experience pushes you to grow up significantly quicker. And some of the experiences I had out there, yes, you're absolutely right. That's where I first kind of got into sales, and I would say got my first proper job, which wasn't part-time earnings at a pub or working for my dad. So that was a great kind of starting point for the working world, but also going through the regional work out there as well. I'm not sure if you know how the visa system works, but you have to, in order back then to get a second year, they've changed it slightly now.
Hmm.
To get a second year on your working holiday visa, you have to go through 90 days of farm work, which was the most grueling work I've ever done. So the two experiences of that farm work and getting my first job, proper job, was the way I saw it, was a
Yeah.
really a good learning curve for me.
In terms of that, uh, that first sort of venture into the sales side of things, then was that something that was always of interest to you, or was it something that sort of found you whilst you were out there? How did it sort of come about?
I think you could probably, if you asked anyone that's in sales, I think 95% of people would say the same thing. I fell into it. Like,
Mm.
it's never, when you're in school. I studied. I went on to do linguistics, English language, whatever you want to call it, because I was good at it at school. I was never really as much of like a numbers person. I was always much better with words, and so I went off to study that at university with no clear direction on where can this take me, like beyond university. What's the plan? There was no plan, and I think no one really talks about at school, at sixth form, what these other careers can kind of do for you. And I think sales in particular is a really interesting one. To answer your question, I got the job because they needed backpackers to come in and do this kind of not grueling work, but you're picking up the phone and you're calling people. My first job was actually selling courses, which is
Right.
kind of, it was actually leadership courses. So it's looking back, it's really actually quite bad. So you go in there and you they train you for about a week, and they've got all of these TVs everywhere, and they're like, when you get a what's called like, it was a sale, but it's kind of like a lead come through, your face pops up on the screen, and there's all these fireworks. You go ding the bell. They got these fishbowl competitions where you put your name in and you could win $500 at the end of the week. Like, everything is sort of gamified to
Yeah.
the extreme, and it makes you feel really, really good, and it's exhilarating. And when I was kind of doing it, after a couple of weeks, I found that uh, my mum's always said I could talk the talk, right? That's what I was always good at when I was younger. So I kind of found, well, actually, I'm 22 years old, and I finally found something that I'm good at. This is a really good feeling. And we're selling these courses, right? And the company sells it. They sell it to you. They're like, we're helping people. You're doing good here. These people, they can become leaders. And what this company did, they they took a job board, and they owned the job board, and it would be full of what I'm assuming is fake job adverts, and they would put them up, and they would get people to go to them. They would get their data, and then we would call up and try and sell them a course. All of this is
Wow.
completely hidden from you. And after kind of a few months, people started to ask questions, and everyone was kind of like, you know, is this right? Is what we're doing a
Yeah.
good thing? And we then found out that the courses we were selling could be done through the government for about 5,000 Aussie dollars, and we were selling them for like 20,000 Aussie dollars. And they obviously don't tell you any of this.
Yeah.
So it was a really weird feeling for me. My performance started to drop big time. When I started to realize kind of what I was doing, and I eventually, you know, very quickly after that, ended up leaving the company. They ended up getting fined. I think they went under maybe 5 years after I left Australia, and they got fined something like 20 million Aussie dollars. Acquire Learning is the company. You can look them up. It's quite a bizarre story, but
Yeah.
that there was two lessons for me there. One is uh, I really enjoyed sales and everything that came with the exhilaration of selling. But what I knew was wherever I went next and whatever I did, I needed to have kind of a passion and a belief in what I was selling. And that's something I've learned is so unbelievably important when it comes to, you have to enjoy what you're doing, but when it comes to sales, you have to actually believe in what you're selling, because you're trying to convince someone
Yeah.
ultimately to buy this product or this tool or whatever it is you're selling. So when I was flogging this course, that's why my performance went downhill. So it was a massive learning for me and a good experience, but um, one I wouldn't want to go for again. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. It's quite crazy that they got away with it for 5 years beyond that as well. But I suppose it's like, yeah, you look at it two ways. There's a positive and a negative. Like you said, you've found this thing that you're actually really good at, and you think this could be something here. Like, let's push on with this. But then you've realised that the company you're doing it for is a bit corrupt in that sense. And yeah, obviously, then
100%.
realising you've got to work in line with your morals is, yeah, obviously a massive lesson. I think a lot of people across the board, within sales or without sales, have got to, like you say, do something that they're passionate about, and yeah, generally feel positive, like has a positive improvement for the world. So before we dig any further into the sales stuff, let's talk about some of the misconceptions of salespeople or working in sales. So people might have a perception they get harassed on the phone by people trying to sell them things, that sort of thing. So what are the biggest misconceptions that you've come across?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's so many ways you can go with this, right? Because what you've just said, that like there, right? You uh, back when landlines were a thing, you'd get, my parents would get sort of 10 calls a day. You'd even get people knocking on the door, right, selling double glazing windows or whatever the classic salesperson sells at the door, and they try and capture you in that moment and make you feel uncomfortable and awkward. And it's that instant kind of, they're trying to get something done on the spot. And me and my partner, we're renovating our house at the moment, and I've actually gone through that, and it's weird being on the other side of it. I've had um, kind of someone show up, and they're like, "Oh, I'll ring my manager, and I'll get you a deal done now, but you've got to sign now." But I'm not surprised people have this overall perception that salespeople are slimy, sleazy, sort of people. But it's also not helped, I guess, by, you look at, you remember the Simpsons, right? You've got Gil, the sleazy the
Mm,
sleazy car salesman, and you've got Wolf of Wall Street, right, where you've got Jordan Belfort's story about how he created an empire on pretty much scamming people out of money, and they're all in this massive floor. They're all picking up the phones, kicking each other, shouting, um, playing like mad games. And I think that's where a lot of people, when I tell them that I'm in sales, they're like, "Oh, that's wild. Like, how do you do that?" Like, and I'm like, "What do you mean? How do I do that?" Like, it's yes, it's a challenging job. It's a target based role. It's stressful. It's demanding, but it's unbelievably rewarding. And I
mm.
think a lot of what you can do. I'm in B2B sales. So what I do is I sell to,
What is B2B? Sorry, just to cut in there.
yeah, it's a good question. So business to business. So you've got
Right.
B2B as business to business. Then you've got B2C, which is business to consumer. So I guess the business to consumer is typically that cold calling individuals. The same as the courses that I was selling, right? It's, I'd ring up the individual and sell directly to the consumer. Whereas what I'm doing is B2B. So I'm calling up we're not calling up. There's lots of different strategies you can use, but we speak to marketers, and marketers can use our product to get a significant ROI, which is return on investment, to
Mhm.
save themselves a lot of time and energy. Um, so I think there's a real education needed, I guess, on if you're thinking about getting into sales or you're thinking about moving in that direction, what are your options? How do you deconstruct the misconceptions? Are you going to prefer like B2C sales? Are you going to
Mm.
prefer B2B? There's benefits and misconceptions about both, but they're very different roles.
Mm. And on that, if you're saying someone sort of getting into sales, so if someone was listening and someone's sort of interested, or maybe they've just started, what are some things they should be thinking about in terms of that? Like, is it a type of person that fits one of those things, or yeah, what sort of things would they be thinking about there?
So that's another really actually really good point. So a lot of conversations that I have, I mentioned before that I got into sales because my mum said that I could talk the talk, right? I wouldn't call myself a particularly extroverted person. I'm not one to shout and scream anymore at like parties and be the center of attention. But then again, I'm not particularly introverted, and I have a lot of people that are more introverted say, "Oh no, no, I could never, uh, be on the phones and talk to people all day." Actually, what I've learned from kind of growing my career in this industry is that introverts and extroverts, very very different people, but introverts are just as good if not better. They can use their skills in a very different way to get the most out of their role. Typically introverts tend to be kind of quiet. They listen. So active listening is one of the most important skills in sales. It's very similar to what you're doing here, right? You're asking open-ended questions. So there's a framework called OPC, which is
Hmm.
open, probe, confirm. So what you're doing here with me, right, is you're asking open-ended questions to understand more about my background. You're then probing into it, into very specific areas to get interesting information that's going to benefit you and your podcast. Um, so that's kind of how the framework works. And introverts, I find, tend to be significantly better at asking an open-ended question. Then they'll listen. And through active listening, the hardest part is you're constantly thinking about what question can I ask next? What question can I ask next? And that completely ruins absolutely everything that you just don't listen. So what happens is you listen and then you ask a probing question from there. Introverts, like I said, tend to be much better, whereas extroverts tend to want to say their part. They're like, oh my god, like I want to say something about that, and it completely ruins all of their listening. But that being said, extroverts tend to be amazing, like relationship builders. They tend to be able to sort of confidently drive next steps, which is really important. They're able to present pricing and negotiations. So there's skills that come naturally to both groups of people, but certainly there's no reason why you can't learn to be an amazing salesperson, no matter who you are or what your background is.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I never thought about introverts and extroverts and how what benefits those things bring, because I think a lot of the time a lot of people probably would look at an introvert as being a negative thing, especially introverts, and they sort of say, "Oh, I'm not confident sort of putting myself out there because I'm an introvert," and it's almost an excuse. But there's a lot of positive things like you just listed there about being potentially better active listeners and sort of probing and just yeah, that listening is so important. And um, what I've learned from some of my guests, I spoke to a SWAT hostage negotiator a while back, and he was saying about how listening is such an important thing in that, and people love to talk. People love to talk about themselves. So I ask an open-ended question and then just go silent and just listen. And off the back of that, if you're just out in a social scenario, people then have a really good opinion of you just because you've listened to them. And it's as simple as that.
100%. Yeah, there's so many small like nuances that come with this type of skill, I guess is the way you put it. And there's something really interesting you said there, right? Is that the skills that you learn in sales, I think, make you like make you a better person in general. Like that point there where you learn a lot about body language and um, kind of eye contact and how to use it. The hostage negotiator. There's a really interesting book called Never Split the Difference by a guy called Chris Voss, who
Right.
worked in the FBI, and he talks about he's gone on to be basically a sales coach, and some of the stories that he kind of comes up with, there's he talks about like changing your voice and your tonality to, he calls it the late night DJ voices, I think is what he calls it, and he kind of goes into this sort of deep voice, and he but then he knows when to bring his tone up. A lot of the coaching work that I do with reps is, you know, you have to match the personality of the person that you're speaking to. Some people are really upbeat and they're really happy, and you can kind of raise your body language and raise your tone to match theirs. But some people are like, they prefer speaking a bit kind of slower and like that. So this comes in, I guess, to the psychology of it. Is a lot of selling these days is done virtually, and it's much harder
Mm,
to read body language and to get a grip on these types of things, even build relationships virtually. But you can do it so much quicker now, whereby you would used to have to travel the country to get in front of one client. Now I can speak to 5, 6 different people in a day. Um, and that's, I guess, what COVID is kind of done right in this virtual world.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
it's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you heard of the 7-28-55 rule? I think that's it. Yeah.
No.
No. So that's, again, that's sort of just on the back of what you said. And again, it was that hostage negotiator who taught me about this. And you're saying there's a 7-28-55 rule and 7-38-55 even. So it's percentages. So you've got 7% of how you communicate is down to what you say. So only 7%. Most people would think that would be sort of the most important thing. People are always worried about what they're saying or what they're not saying and how they can be better next time or whatever. You then got that 38 is your tone. So your tone of voice. And like you were saying there, that's so important now because you might not be in person. You might just see us how we're seeing each other now, just our faces. And it's quite hard to read body language across the screen. Um, and that last one is body language. So that's 55% is your body language. And it's quite an interesting thing for me to learn about just in terms of communications and making me realize that your tone of voice and your body language are way more important than what you're actually saying. And if you think back to like any presentation or meeting you've been in where someone's saying something quite interesting but really monotone and really like not active at all in how they're moving, you're just disinterested straight away.
100%.
In terms of, again, you mentioned COVID, so tell me a bit about how COVID has changed what you do and the way your industry works.
For sales in general, it's changed an awful lot. But for the business I work with, it's monumental. So pre-COVID, when I first joined, I landed back from Australia in August 2019, I think it was, and moved to London in September 2019. And me and my partner moved in with two of our best friends in Battersea. We moved into the flat and got a job together on the same day. We're both still in the same roles. And
Awesome.
um, when what was it, March 2020? You can imagine that we've
Yeah.
had six
Not long
months, right?
after.
Yeah, exactly. So 6 months working for a gifting platform where absolutely everything we did was sending gifts to offices. So let's say I was trying to win a client, and I had a proposal on the table for our product, and the client said, or the potential client says, "Oh, we're meeting on Friday to discuss your presentation and your proposal." So what I would do is I'd use our platform to then send 12 cupcakes with our branding and their branding to their office on that day. And that's that relationship building side, right? What gifting does, it's the law of reciprocity. If you're doing something for them, they'll do something for us. There's a lot of psychology behind gifting, which again, we talk about sales psychology. It's just so interesting
Yeah.
the way it all works. So we were sending gifts to offices primarily, right? And I remember the day, sort of the day we went back to work virtually after Boris announced we were locking down, and we sat there, and I was the third employee in the UK at this company. There were two
Right.
BDRs, which is a business development rep. The job of a business development rep is to generate the leads, so they would gain the interest. I was an account executive. They would pass it to me. I would then take it from that first meeting to then closing the deal. And sort of six of us, seven of us sat in this room, and we were like, "Holy shit! Like, what are we gonna do here? Our entire business model is sending gifts to offices, and
Mm,
we have no money. We're a startup. There's like seven of us. Crap! Like, what do we do?" And on the spot, between us, we came up with this idea that we would build out these landing pages and use the landing pages and what we call address confirmation to target these prospects and customers, and they would be able to fill in this form and be able to send it to their home addresses. And we were like, this is never going to work. Like, people are so sensitive in the B2B world about giving away their home addresses and their data. Like, we are screwed here. And within like a week or two, the uptake was enormous. Everyone was kind of lonely in their houses, sort of scared about what was going to happen,
mm,
worried about their jobs and their budgets. And what we actually found was certain marketing tactics went through the roof. So in that March, April, May, webinar content went through the roof. I think a lot of people started doing like virtual podcasts as well,
yeah.
and it went up by like 3,000% because all of a sudden marketers were going, crap, like we can't meet people in person anymore. Events, in person events, have been decimated. So what actually happened was all of these tech companies, like especially like cybersecurity companies, started booming. Like, the tech industry went through the roof, and they had no way. They had all these big budgets, but no events to spend it on. And these events, they cost millions and millions of dollars for big. I'm talking in dollars because we use USD, pounds or whatever,
Yeah.
to to generate leads. They were gone. So these companies were going, where do we spend our money? And all of a sudden, this little startup gifting platform was like, we'll take some of that. We'll take some of that budget for you. And then this gamble that we made of going virtual home addresses started to really take off because people in their homes, they wanted that human element. They didn't mind sending something to their homes because that was their life, their office. Now everything they were doing was in their homes, and they wanted, I guess, an element of that human reaction that gifting gives you, that sending an email or making like a call or jumping on a Zoom, it doesn't give you. So we started doing a lot more personalized gifting. So some of the stuff that I used to do was send like a cookie box, and I would take their LinkedIn photo and I'd engrave their photo on the on the cookie box. And we'd do this for a partner. It's all done through the platform, and you'd put their name on it, and we wouldn't put
Mm,
any Reach Desk like logo or branding. It was personal to them. And so many people that I speak to even now that I started these relationships with 4 years ago have still got these like cookie boxes or an engraved bottle of tequila that they've drunk, but that bottle of tequila is sitting on their mantelpiece because it's engraved and it's personal. They don't want to throw it away. So
mm.
I think matching up the sort of the relationship building side and doing something personal for someone really changed when COVID hit.
Yeah, definitely. I suppose, like you said, at that time, everyone's feeling a bit uncertain. They don't know how long it's going to be. There's a lot of loneliness, definitely. You're only seeing people online. So, yeah, to have someone sort of put that much thought into a gift and sending something like personalized and engraved, yeah, that sounds, yeah, really nice and like, very clever sort of decision by you guys to go down that avenue. So tell me a little bit about some of those psychological things and the way that they're used within. You mentioned reciprocity. I can't, I
It's
can't
hard to
say it.
say, isn't it?
I can't say it, but you said it and briefly explained it. So just go over that and sort of other examples of that, and then any other things, ways that sort of people are sold to.
Yeah, there's tons of ways that you can use psychology when you're selling something. And this, I'm still learning a lot of this as I go as well. I never studied psychology at school or university, but we've got some incredible people that I've come across and have been on my team that use psychology on a day to day basis. So the law of reciprocity, it's a mouthful. It took me years to learn how to say that, but that's just part of, I guess, gifting, right? That's part of what we use for marketing, right? We're doing something nice for you, and you have something called a CTA, which is a call to action. And typically, in a sales email, you need to have like a call to action, which is a question to try and get or elicit like a response. If you don't have a CTA, someone's going to read it and go, like, I'm not going to respond. I'm not going to respond to that. That slightly changes because, again, psychology comes into gifting. Sometimes we won't even put a call to action on a gift. We'll do it in like an email afterwards, and that call to action will be like, "Hey, I saw your gift arrived. Would love to would love to get your thoughts on the gift." So we're asking a
Mm.
question about the gift. We're not trying to push to get a meeting. And what happens is that's when that law of reciprocity kicks in. Hey, this person's done something nice for me. They're not this salesperson sort of trying to push to get a meeting. And you'd be amazed the amount of people that positively respond to that kind of sales outreach. And that's why we kind of do what we do. And then when with selling, we don't do everything. A lot of people think sales, you're spending all your time on cold calls and stuff like that. A lot of what we do is a blend of in person meetings, presentations, proposal reviews, that kind of thing. But also Zoom meetings, I guess, just like this, right, where we're speaking to a client or a prospect, and we're trying to learn more about what they're doing. And there's so many small tactics that you can use to give yourself the best possible chance of ending your sales process positively. So I'll give you some examples from like what we would call a discovery demo. So
Mhm.
discovery demo is where you're learning about that person or that prospect, what they care about, and then you're running a demo to showcase how we can help them solve that problem. So everything has a structure. You typically would start with an agenda, and you'd have what's called an upfront contract. And that upfront contract might involve something along the lines of, "Hey Sam, great to speak to you today. I'm going to ask you a few questions just to understand a bit more about what you care about. I'll demo my product. We'll show you how we can help you solve some of these problems." This can go one
Mhm.
of two ways. Either you're like, "Yes, love it. We're going to book a next step, and we're going to jump on with X person, maybe a decision maker or budget holder." The second option is you hate it and we go our separate ways, but we'll still be friends, I promise. Right? The psychology is saying that what you're aiming to do is you're aiming to get their permission, right? How does that sound? Yes, that's great, right? You've then got their buy-in that this call is going to go one of two ways. So that when you bring it up at the end, you're then understanding a bit more about, okay, are we going to drive this deal forwards, or is it going nowhere? If it's going nowhere, you cut it, and then you save a hell of a lot of time, not wasting time with window shoppers and people that don't
Mm.
really care about your product. Then as you move through that sort of discovery section, exactly like I said before, you're asking open-ended questions and then probing into that. There's lots of different kind of sales kind of frameworks you can use. You've got spiced, which is situation. You learn about their situation. Problem, you learn about the problems with the situation. Impact, you're basically learning how that's impacting your role. And then when you get into the actual demo, you do what's called flipping the demo, which you flip the demo. So our product has 30, 40 features rather than just going for a standardized demo, which I'd say 95% of salespeople do. The best salespeople flip that demo. They go, right, you told me this. You told me you're really struggling with these marketing conversions. I'm going to show
Mm.
you this very specific part of the demo that is going to help solve your problem. And I'm going to leave the other 95%. I don't even talk about the other 95% of the product. I'm
Right.
just showing them what they care about.
So specifying in on that thing that's going to help them as opposed to just listing all of the good things about it.
Exactly right. Yeah. And previously, another misconception of sales, right, is people buy from people. You can be biggest people person in the world, but if what you're selling doesn't help that person, gone are the days of convincing someone just based on personality that this is the right thing for them. And as you go more up market, and what I mean by more up market is the the more expensive your solution. Our product is typically between sort of $30,000 and $120,000 typically. A lot of enterprise account executives will be selling $1 million products. You're talking a sales cycle length of 18 months, 24 months, where you have to project manage absolutely every step through that process, right? So yeah, this is goes back to the introverts versus extroverts piece, right? Where um, relationship building is a big part of what we do, but people will not spend their budgets and their hard earned marketing money on a solution which does not solve their problems. So everything we do, you can liken it. This is going to sound stupid, but you can liken it to a doctor, right? You don't just walk into a doctor's surgery and they go, "Oh, here's some aspirin, right? Or here's some whatever ibuprofen," without
Yeah.
knowing what the problem is, right? They're going to ask you problems and they're going to go, "Right, tell me about what's going on." Then they'll go, "Right, problems with your knee. Is it the bottom of your knee? Is it the top of your knee? Is it behind?" Okay, right. They'll hone in and then they'll diagnose that problem and give you what's relevant to that issue. Sales is we're not doctors, don't get me wrong, but it's very similar. You diagnose the problem and then you give them the right solution.
Yeah, that's a good analogy to explain it. And yeah, understanding what the person's after before just blurting out everything and making it, I suppose again, it's bringing it into that very personal aspect of it, like you did with the gifting. You're personalizing the solution. You're finding what they need and just giving them that. You don't need to give it a blanket pitch. So yeah, that's really interesting. What about stuff like using scarcity? Is that something that you know of, like the sort of like limited times, exclusive to this place sort of thing?
What do you mean by that? Sorry, can you explain a bit further?
So like limited time offers, sort of to get people to act fast.
Nice. So that's actually interesting. You asked that, right? That's another uh, big. I wouldn't say like necessarily misconception, right? Because that's that's a big part of sales. People know that discounts and I don't know end of quarter you would probably say in my industry, right, comes with financial benefits, but a lot of people. My dad is a sucker for. Do you remember bidup.tv, which was like, uh,
I
you,
don't think I
you'd
do.
you'd get this like bloke from like Essex, and he'd be going, "Ah, limited time discount, discount, discount," and it would be like the arrows would be coming down, everything would be flashing on the screen, and my dad would be sitting there at like 10 o'clock at night, and it'd flick onto this thing by accident. And for my 18th birthday, I opened up my one of my presents, and it was 200 batteries because at the time I was playing Xbox, and I'd complained that I had a problem with my batteries running out quickly. So my dad had flicked onto this screen, and it's like batteries, lowest price ever, lowest price ever, and he buys me these 200 batteries. I'm like, "You're such a sucker! You're getting so suckered in for a deal." But actually, I had a problem with my batteries, right? And that luckily, whatever he landed on fixed that problem. So I had a problem, there
Yeah,
was a solution. So I guess it ties into that. But if the biggest thing here, right, is that um, we're really big at Reach Desk, and I know a lot of sales orgs are on making sure that if you can diagnose the problem, right, and the the problem is big enough, and the impact of that problem is affecting that person and that business enough for them to make a change, and you can show them a business case, right? And a business case is basically a document that showcases if you make this change, here are the outcomes. And you have two things: you've got return on investment and you've got cost of inaction. Return on investment is, okay, if you make this change, this is the return that you will get. If you spend this $50,000 on this product, you will likely receive $500,000 because of the data that we have. Here's how we prove it. This is what you can potentially get if you use the product correctly. Then you've got cost of inaction, which is if you don't make this change now and you continue the way you are, here's what you're missing out on. Here's what you're losing. So, for example, we focus a lot on events. A lot of marketers send big packages to events, and it takes them a week to sort out. But they need that swag, those hoodies, those pens for that event. So it's a big part of their marketing strategy. If they don't change that, they're losing a week of their time. What would they be doing differently with that time? Okay, you could actually be generating more return on investment, right? You could be doing X, Y, Z. So the cost of you not acting now for that event you've got in 2 months' time is actually drastic. You need to act now, right? And we build a plan and what's called an MLP, which is a mutual launch plan. You need it by this date. We're going to work backwards, and these are the steps that we need to take in order to get there. So to answer your question, right, we try and avoid that whole limited time discounts and uh, you get this money off by this time. Don't get me wrong, it 100% comes into it, and that's often what can drive people. But really, the first 2 3 weeks of a sales cycle are the most important. Can you get the right people in the room, understand who they are, what they care about, and why they would buy, and then at a later stage, if procurement or someone come in, they're going to want to win. They're going to want a bit of a discount, and that's when you can use that type of thing.
Yeah, yeah. I suppose the reason I ask is it's one we see a lot in sales in general across shops and stuff like that, and obviously, probably in its biggest sense, would be like Black Friday, and that whole weekend. Or some companies make it a whole week now, don't they? So, but it's incredible to me watching people around that time of the year how they suddenly start buying everything that they don't really need and they didn't weren't really planning on getting. And you hear people sort of justify it and say, "Well, I got this because it was this much, and now it's this much. That's a massive discount." So, but if you didn't buy it, then it's even more of a discount because you don't need it and you didn't spend any money. But yeah, it's just something that you sort of observe, I suppose, quite often.
My partner always says to me, she's like, for someone that's in sales, you're sold to so easily. Like I am such a sucker for people always complain. They're like Instagram. They're like, oh, Instagram are stealing my data. They're sending me like these adverts when I was talking about something last week. I'm like, give it to me. Like that's what I want. Like if I'm interested in something, I don't want an advert for a toothbrush if I don't need a toothbrush. I want, and this is where the B2C tactics and the B2B are quite different. Typically, you can easily make a B2B sale without needing too many humans behind it. So a lot of the marketing that they do will be like targeted ads, for example, where on Instagram, all I get at the moment post Christmas is clothes. And that's because it's winter. I'm interested in buying a sweater or a jumper. They're using algorithms to market specific products because they know that the likelihood is I'm hovering my mouse over, I don't know, a certain website for 5 seconds longer than I should be. Therefore, I'm interested in clothes. So it's really interesting how I'm not an expert in that B2C side of things, but you're
Yeah,
absolutely right. They do the consumer market. We're a consumerist society, right? Everything we do is based around, I guess, material value, like who has the
yeah.
nicer car, who has a bigger house, who has these certain things, which is crazy. But
Mm,
it's not something I've ever really delved into, that B2C side.
yeah. You said there about you're sold too easily. Because of what you do you see those things, even though you're sold too easily, say, do you still sort of catch yourself and go, oh, I see what they did there? I like that.
100%, yeah. And I think it's really important as a sales leader to go through the experiences of we use call recording software called Gong, where we listen in and try and spot our own salespeople using specific tactics, and if they're not using them, we'll coach them. But it's also important, I think, for sales leaders to go out and experience what other tactics other people are using, because there's so many things. I mentioned that cost of inaction thing. The reason that's top of mind is I ran a training session on it Thursday with the team, and that's not something we're doing very well, but it's a tactic that I heard another sales rep doing. So you're absolutely right. Yes, in my mind I'm constantly thinking, if I get a cold call, I'll usually pick up the phone and I'll hear the person out, and if it's interesting, I'll pass them on to the right people. I'll try and help them out. Sales is really it's difficult. It's hard. Um,
Yeah.
it's always sad when you hear some people, especially like sales leaders, they'll get a cold call and they'll tell the person to, like, piss off and stuff like that. It's quite horrible. So I think it's really important to be respectful to those people that are calling. But yes, absolutely, you can learn. I learned from SDRs, which are technically the bottom of the rung, if you like. That's the junior sales reps. There's so many people that are so good at their job in that role. I'm so far that was 7 years ago that I was doing that role. So it's really important to listen and try and learn from anyone that's in your industry or doing a job similar to you.
Mm. And in terms of that sort of cold calling side of things that you mentioned there, like if someone's calling up and trying to get a foot in the door or something, and obviously the two options are you either try and help them as you do, and some people will just tell them to do one. So what techniques could people use if that's whether it's phone or if it's a first email they're sending? Is there anything they can put in that might have more of a impact to draw that person in to offer them help or sort of bring them a bit more success?
Yeah, there's tons and tons of stuff you can do across both email and cold calling. I won't go into loads of them because we'll be here all day, and I don't want to bore you with absolutely everything. But a lot of the mistakes people make. Let's start with email, right? If you're sending someone a cold email, I'm sure if you go into your junk mail or you go into even your proper inbox, you'll get emails which say stuff like, "Hey Sam, I hope this email finds you well," or something like that. And it's like you don't know who I am. Why are you saying that you hope this email finds me well? And what happens
Yeah.
is if you go on Gmail and you look down your email list, you'll see the header of the email, and you'll probably see the first 10 to 15 words. And if I go into my junk box, right, I can tell you now there'll be hundreds of emails in there from B2B salespeople trying to sell to me, and the first line will pretty much always be something along the lines of, "I hope this email finds you well," or, "Hey, did you see my last email? I didn't see your last email because I don't care about what you're trying to sell to me. You need to be targeting me in a better way. So
Mm.
get to the point. That's the first one. A lot of what we teach here is again that personalization element, right? You have to capture someone's attention as quickly as possible, and a lot of people get really creative in the actual email header itself or that first line. I've got someone on my team, Emily, who is an expert at email prospecting, and she will go on like that their LinkedIn. She's very like forward and confident with what she's doing. She sends soup based emails because someone on her LinkedIn that she's seen has posted about being sick and having to eat a load of soup. She's so specific, but the point is that's what captures people's attention. It's also human. She uses like colloquial language. She's not like super formal. That's the
Yeah.
mistake that 98% of people make is they think, oh my god, like I'm targeting a senior decision maker. That senior decision maker is a human with children, a family. They go watch football on the weekends. They hang out with their mates and drink beers. I'm sure if you can get their attention in a human way, that's going to be what drives this deal forwards, not hoping that they're well when you don't even know them, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I suppose, yeah, that's such a common opener. Um, and I guess, yeah, that's sort of been the running theme of the whole conversation today is that sort of human side of it and bringing that personal aspect into it, which has seemed to bring you and your company into sort of a lot more success. And would you say that's the most important characteristic for a good salesperson? Is there any other things that sort of come to mind?
So I think the most important skills for me, honestly, are active listening. Yes, absolutely being human. But that active listening part is so important because it's really really difficult. I just want to kind of call that out. It's really really difficult because as humans, we it's very natural to be egotistical, to constantly think about yourself, but you're constantly thinking about how are you going to be portrayed. That's the biggest thing for a human, right? I don't want to look like an idiot. So what I'm going to do is, as they're speaking, I'm going to try and listen to absolutely everything, like anything they're saying. I'm going to latch on to one specific piece of information. You have to show vulnerability in sales, and that vulnerability is I'm going to just listen to everything they say, and in my head, I'm just going to try and at the end of what they say, try and pick out the most important, relevant part, and I'm going to try and probe into that specific piece of information. So to me, that active listening point is so important and something that takes years and years to get good at, and is something for some people that I do think can't necessarily be taught. Like not every
Mm,
industry is right for everyone, right? So there are people that aren't going to be suited to sales, but I would say that's the number one skill needed, really.
yeah, yeah. Sort of understand that now from today's conversation how important that is. I've never really thought about it, I suppose, but yeah, relating to someone and sort of understanding their perspective before you even start trying to sell them anything is is so important. Um, in terms of yourself, so you've mentioned about it is like it's a lot of work, it's quite intense work, it can be stressful at times. How do you look after your own sort of work-life balance? Is it a job that can be separated from your outside life quite easily, or is it sort of blend over?
Yes and no. I think what, especially during COVID, the most difficult part was work became life basically. For a lot of people, they were on furlough, right? Whereas for myself and my partner, who works for a veg subscription company called Oddbox, they also went through the roof. So we were working silly hours, and I think one of the things that becomes really difficult is switching off. So
Mm,
that's where I think you have to come up with ways to uh, stop that kind of that work mindset, those work thoughts, and do whatever you can to break the two apart. So for me, that is going on a walk or trying to find some way. In a weird way, I love my commute. So I'm only in the office twice a day, but for me, getting on the tube, that's the moment where work is over. I'm going home. I'm thinking about dinner. I'm thinking about going to the gym. I'm thinking about walking the dog, whatever it might be. And for me, that was a really big part of going from COVID back into work, and why I love going to the office. And that
mm,
to me is really important. When I'm at home, I'm really trying my best not to go desk and then walk 10 meters to the sofa and just sit down, because I'm watching TV, I'm watching the football, I'm doing whatever, and my mind's going like 100 miles an hour. What's this client doing? Like, what's happening here?
yeah.
And there's some parts of it where you can't get away from it. I manage people in the US, right, and their working hours are different to us. So I respect that there are things that I need to do into the evenings, but then it becomes about setting boundaries. Like, this is what I'm going to do to help and support you. Like, this is who you need to go to. A lot of people try and do everything themselves, right? And they try and be that go-to person, but actually delegation. Like, I'm not the expert in this, so you don't need to come to me at 8 p.m. my time. Go to these people first, and if you can't get the answer or you can't figure out yourself, then you can come to me. And small little tactics like that, when you're managing people and you're leading a team, I think is really, really important to try and keep yourself, let's call it, sane.
Yeah. I think definitely, yeah, it's something that a lot of people probably struggle with is, and probably because of COVID, it's probably exacerbated it somewhat in terms of more people are working from home or hybrids. So there's that blurred lines between, okay, my office is also my home. How do I sort of separate that? At least if you're going to and from an office, like you say, that getting on the tube becomes, okay, I'm now in work mode or I'm now out of work mode. Um, I think a lot of people are still struggling with that. In terms of like myself, obviously, I'm very lucky as a firefighter. It's you can only do that from a fire station, but with the podcast, for example, whilst I wouldn't say it's work, it's definitely a lot going on all the time, and it's something I'm trying to work on. Is trying to have a bit more of a structured process to have certain times where I am doing it, and then certain times where I'm not. Um, Editing 10 p.m. on a Saturday night or something. I don't know, but that's also part of the fun and part of the learning. So I wouldn't want to skip that part of it.
How are you currently managing that?
I'm managing it okay. Again, I'm lucky with my shift patterns how it works, so I can get a bit more time to do this side of things. And this year, I want to focus a bit more on getting on top of booking in guests ahead of time, prepping for them, so it's all sort of done a bit more ahead of time. I think recently over Christmas, obviously it's difficult to get through to some people. So I definitely got to a space where I'm sort of chasing my tail. Like it's all very quick moving and a bit chaotic. But again, that's part of the learning. Going through that has made me realize how much I now need to work on that. So yeah, that's something I'm definitely working on. Uh, for yourself, in terms of lessons you've learned from what you've been doing, I know you spoke earlier and said that you're still learning a lot of stuff. But what would you say some of the biggest lessons you've learned from your sort of experience and your journey through everything that we've discussed today? I suppose what are sort of the biggest things you've learned from that?
I think for me, probably my career has accelerated at the same company over the past 5 years. I've kind of gone from account executive to senior account executive to then a sales manager, which was managing a small team in the UK, to then senior sales manager, to then director of global sales. So sort of five promotions across 5 years, and the roles, the company has just developed and changed so much. And I think one of the biggest lessons that I've learned is, just because you're good at your role, it doesn't necessarily mean you're right or you're suited to leadership. So uh, when I was a senior account executive, I was very good at what I did. I was good at selling. I was consistently hitting my target, and therefore I was earmarked for a leadership role, right? And I just kind of, again, similar to the way I fell into sales, um, I fell into it. Right? I was like, yeah, why not? Like this seems fun. I'd never done a leadership role before though, right? And a lot of it again was learning on the spot, learning on the job and on the go. And again, I don't think anyone really warned me or explained how different it would be, right? The pressures change and they shift. So as an individual contributor, you control your own target. I had a target of $200,000 a quarter. And I got myself into this position of, these are the outputs that I need to do in order to get to that number. I don't care what other people are doing. Um, I control my own destiny, right? And if there was someone that performed better than me, I would go straight to them and go, hey, like, tell me about what you did differently this quarter. I'd listen to their calls. I'd learn from them. A lot of this was like self-learning, self-development, pushing myself to be the best that I could possibly be. And at the time, it was driven by career progression, but also driven by money as well. I'm engaged. I bought a house. Want to create a family, and these things don't come cheap in London, right? So it was finding my own motivations and really harnessing those to become the best that I could be. And then all of a sudden, within sort of the end of, when was it, end of 2021, I was then kind of thrown into this leadership role, and everything kind of becomes so different. Your control is completely lost. Everything that you could control previously becomes, okay, these six people that I'm managing, all six of them have different stages of their careers. They have different passions. Some of them are extroverts, some of them are introverts, some of them need work on later stage funnel deals, some of them need work on early stage stuff. We've got to hire people. Like, what do you to look out for when you're hiring? And all of a sudden, everything just changes. So if I look back on that and kind of think about how I would have done it differently, I would have definitely immersed myself in that leadership role. Like, I'm passionate about this, I'm interested in it. Let's think about logically what are the big differences between the two. Because luckily I love it, like absolutely love it. I get so much joy from helping other people, learning about what are their motivators. Another really interesting one, someone on my team, a guy called Sean, he said, well, you should speak about what are our demotivators as well. And that was, again, a light bulb moment for me. It's like, he then told me what demotivates him at work, so I can help him unblock those to then motivate him to do better. So I'm constantly learning these small little kind of tactics and skills that help me to become a good leader. But
Mm.
ultimately, the most difficult thing is, uh, the people that you manage, they are not you. it's very, very easy, right, to go, oh, that's really simple. Like, why are you doing that? Like, that's such a uh, an obvious thing. What's obvious to you is not obvious to other people. You've people on my team are from the ages of 24 to 39, I think it is. Different life experiences, different different career paths. So just make sure, if you are moving into a leadership role, you're understanding that, ask these open-ended questions exactly like I am doing when I'm selling, exactly what you're doing to me now. Ask your team, what do they care about? What's stopping them from fulfilling their potential? Where do they want to be in 5 years' time? Because if you can find out their way of thinking, their motivations, their passions, then it's going to help you manage them through that process significantly easier.
Yeah. And I guess that again comes back to that whole point of sort of understanding the individual that we spoke about throughout it today, in terms of whilst they're a team, they're also individuals. So understanding who that person is, what their experience is, like you say, and then what works for that person. Some people like to be sort of have a lot of input. Some people like to have very little input, and as long as that works for them and it works for you, perfect. But it is just that understanding, isn't it? As you say.
Exactly. And I learned, like, the thing is, like you said earlier, which really stood out to me, was you mentioned about the body language and the eye contact and the tonality, and you said they can be used in social, these things can be used in social situations, right? And that's where I feel really lucky, is my learnings across the last 5, 6, 7 years in sales, is so many of the skills that I've learned on this job, it's becoming more human. It's learning to speak to people, to care more, to yeah, help other people grow their passions, whatever it might be. But ultimately, I can use these skills in my personal life, and I think that's why we should speak more about what are the benefits of getting into a sales role, especially if you're nervous about it, or you're an introvert, or you're not sure about if it's right for you. Give it a go, because when I'm at a party or a gathering or at the pub, all of these open-ended questions and the active listening and the skills that I've learned, you can use it in all areas of your life. And wherever I go next, whatever I do in my career, whether that's sales or not, I know that so many of the skills are um, interchangeable, because they're human skills. They're fundamental to both work and social life.
Yeah. Yeah, 100% agree. And learning those skills, learning how to listen, learning how to reflect things back, clarify things. Um, I learned all this quite recently from learning to become a Samaritan's volunteer listener. So pick up the phones and listen to people, obviously going through all sorts of scenarios. But learning those skills there has helped massively in both like day-to-day life, communications, at social events, social gatherings. I'm way more confident now just having a conversation, giving that open question and just listening. And also for this podcast, it's helped massively. So yeah, if anyone feels that way, I would employ them to just put themselves in that position, learn the skills, and just see where it takes them. Because I think it really opens your eyes when you start to work it out.
Yeah, I think one
Um,
thing someone said to me was, be comfortable being uncomfortable. It's quite a cringe saying, but that's
Absolutely.
something I'm really trying to embrace this year. Like, I probably wouldn't have done something like this, a year or two ago. But I think getting yourself into these positions, and what an incredible thing to do, that Samaritan's piece, right? And I think
Mm.
the skills you're using there, like you're talking to people, you're learning the same as a. If you then took those skills to being a firefighter, right, and you're in a difficult situation where someone's scared, maybe you're trying to get them to leave a building and they won't leave a building. Those kind of like uh, speaking skills, listening skills, trying to help them. These kind of things are human, right? It blends across anything that you do. It's really interesting to see you've got 3 or 4 different things that you're doing where just these human skills, they relate to absolutely all of what you're doing. It's really
Yeah, just
interesting.
blankets across all of them. Absolutely. Um, So bringing it into a close now. So one of the things I like to do at the end of an episode is to ask the guest to leave a question for the listeners. So the idea of this is when before I started the podcast and I listened to a lot of other podcasts, I like to go away and have conversations about the episode, about things I'd learned, things I'd listened to. So if I asked you to leave a question for the listener to take away and go and speak to a friend, family member, a stranger, whoever it is, what would that question be?
That in itself is a very good question. So I think what are you going to do in 2025 that's different or makes you feel uncomfortable? And I think that's something that I've asked myself, right? And potentially what's even led me to speaking to you here. What am I going to embrace that in the moment I'm like, I do not want to do that, but I'm going to do it anyway. And uh, by the end of it, every single time you leave thinking, yeah, I'm glad I did that. So the question is, what are you going to do this year that makes you feel uncomfortable?
Yeah, I like that a lot. And I think, yeah, that just comes back to that. You've got to get comfortable being uncomfortable. You've got to try things. When you try things, you either succeed or you learn from it. There's failure isn't really a thing because it's just a learning experience. Failure's never as bad as we think it is. So, yeah, you either learn a lesson about yourself, who you are, who you're not, or you succeed and then you push yourself into that next bracket of discomfort.
I love that.
Um, so yeah, I think that's a really nice place to finish. So thank you so much for coming on today. I've really enjoyed it. Anyone listening who wants to sort of find you online, follow what you're doing, find the business, where can they do that?
Probably the best place is going to be LinkedIn, I would say, unfortunately, which is you can find Reach Desk on LinkedIn, but you can also find myself as well. I've, again, going back to that uncomfortable piece, I've started posting 3 to 5 times a week now about stuff that I've learned, both sales and personally. I'm getting a lot of shit from my friends for it, as you can imagine, on WhatsApp groups, but I don't care. I'm uncomfortable with it, and I'm
Yeah.
glad I'm doing it, right? So the best place to find me is going to be LinkedIn.
Yeah. I'll put a link to that down below. And just on that, what you're posting about your learnings and stuff, do you find that that then cements what you've learned? Does that help you writing it down? Does that help you sort of get it out of your mind and understand it a bit more?
Yeah, definitely. And what it elicits is comments from other people. I always try and max out my connections on LinkedIn with other like-minded people. I'm always adding sales leaders, sales reps, marketers, and what that does is it elicits conversations on the actual post itself. But I haven't got a massive following, so typically what happens is people will send me a message or something, and I'll end up speaking to them and asking them questions. They'll ask me questions. So there's so many positives that has come from posting more, and absolutely, I'm learning as I go.
Awesome. So there we are. And bring it into close then. So anyone who's listened today and you've enjoyed the episode, please do share it with someone who you think would enjoy it as well. If you haven't already, then rate and follow the show wherever you're listening. That really helps us reach new people. And you can also follow the podcast on Instagram at Lonely Chapter Podcast. And lastly, from me, thank you for listening.